For 2 hours straight, every single news anchor kept saying the same thing over and over again. They were talking about how someone got hurt but was going to be okay. And for some reason I still cannot figure out, it made me so angry. It just hit me in a weird way. But then I started thinking about something else. For years and years, Princess Diana's family barely said a word in public. They stayed quiet while people all over the world kept comparing Meghan Markle to Diana. Everywhere you looked, there were headlines saying things like, "What Meghan is and how she is, it is just so similar to my mom." It went on and on. But now, all of that quiet has apparently come to an end. And the reaction to this news is sending huge shockwaves through everyone who follows the royal family closely. What Diana's sister is said to have finally shared has started a huge new argument about loyalty, about what Diana left behind, and about whether there are some lines that should never have been crossed. People who support Meghan and Harry are already picking their side. People who criticize them are picking theirs. But the real full story is still super controversial, and not everyone agrees on what really happened. Did Prince Harry underestimate a voice he probably thought would just stay quiet forever? So, what do you think about all of this? Was Diana's sister right to finally speak her mind, or should family matters always stay private? Go ahead and share your thoughts down in the comments. And do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you want more royal stories. For many decades, one person stayed almost completely out of the public fights that kept happening around Princess Diana's memory. While documentaries came out, interviews caused arguments, and endless comparisons filled up newspapers and TV debates. Diana's sister, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, hardly ever joined the conversation. Unlike so many people connected to one of the most famous women in modern history, she built a reputation for staying far away from any kind of publicity. That silence was not just for a short time. It lasted through all kinds of changes in the royal family, through different public opinions, and through so many moments when other people probably would have spoken up. That is exactly why recent reports suggesting that Sarah has finally shared her thoughts about the ongoing discussions surrounding Meghan Markle have created such huge interest. Royal watchers noticed something unusual right away. This was not someone just looking for attention. This was not just another commentator giving their opinion from the side. This was someone who actually knew Diana long before the cameras ever showed up, long before royal life changed everything, and long before the whole world turned her into such an icon. The timing of all of this only made people more curious. For years, people have been comparing Meghan and Diana over and over again. Supporters often point out how similar their experiences were inside royal life. They say both women faced enormous pressure, both were watched by the media constantly, and both had to deal with a lot of criticism. But critics argue that these comparisons make two very different stories seem way too simple. They say the situations were not really the same at all. Even with all of this debate going on, Sarah stayed mostly quiet. That silence created a kind of mystery. When someone chooses not to speak for years and years, people naturally start to wonder what they truly think. The absence of a public opinion can be just as powerful as actually saying something. In Sarah's case, every year that passed without any comment seemed to make people believe even more that she just preferred privacy over public involvement. Then, suddenly, everything shifted. Reports started going around that Diana's sister was no longer okay with just staying completely on the sidelines, while all these debates involving Meghan, Harry, and Diana's memory kept getting more intense. Whether people saw it as concern, frustration, or just a desire to offer her own perspective, her reported involvement immediately changed the whole atmosphere around the story. Questions started multiplying almost overnight. What made her change her mind? Why now? And maybe the most important question of all, what convinced someone so private that staying silent was no longer the best choice? Inside royal circles, curiosity reportedly grew really fast. Sarah has never been known for making big public statements, which made the whole situation feel even more significant. Her connection to Diana gives her perspective a special kind of weight that very few other people can claim. She was not just watching events from far away. She was part of Diana's earliest life, long before the world ever knew her name. As more and more speculation spread, one reality became harder and harder to ignore. When a person who has spent decades avoiding public controversy finally seems willing to step into a sensitive debate, people assume that something important must have changed. Whether that assumption turns out to be correct is still unclear. But Sarah's reported decision to break her years of silence has introduced a completely new dimension to a story that was already filled with so many questions. And the consequences of that shift might just be starting to show. Long before public arguments, TV interviews, and endless headlines turned the royal story into a huge global spectacle, Prince Harry shared a special connection with a part of his family that meant a lot to him. The Spencer family was not just part of his mother's history, they were part of his own story too. After Princess Diana died in 1997, those family ties became even more important. During one of the darkest times in his life, Harry stayed close to the relatives who had known Diana not as a princess, but as a daughter, a sister, and a family member. That shared loss created bonds that seemed strong, long lasting, and really hard to break. For many years, a lot of people assumed those relationships stayed pretty much the same. The Spencers represented a direct link to Diana's world, and Harry often seemed to really value that connection. From the outside, it felt natural to believe that Diana's family would always understand his perspective better than anyone else. After all, they shared the same grief. They carried the same memories. They understood the personal side of Diana that most of the world never got to see. That assumption may have become one of the most important factors in the story that is now unfolding. As debates surrounding Meghan Markle, royal life, and Diana's legacy got more and more intense, public attention often focused on the divide between Harry and the royal institution. Much less attention was paid to how Diana's own relatives viewed all of these developments. For a long time, their silence left plenty of room for speculation. Without any public statements, many people just filled in the blanks themselves. Some decided that Diana's family naturally supported Harry's decisions. Others assumed they privately shared his frustrations. But assumptions are not the same as facts, and silence can sometimes create a very misleading picture. The possibility that Lady Sarah McCorquodale might view certain events differently immediately changes that whole equation. Her reported involvement introduces an uncomfortable question that not many people seemed eager to ask. What if not everyone connected to Diana interprets recent events in the same way? What if loyalty to Harry and loyalty to Diana's memory do not always lead to the same conclusions? That possibility carries unusual weight because criticism from strangers is easy to ignore. But criticism from within a family is something completely different. It comes from people who share history, experience, and emotional connections that outsiders simply cannot claim. When concerns come from that circle, they are often viewed through a different lens. They feel more personal, more difficult to ignore, and way more complicated to explain away. Some observers think Harry might have expected understanding from Diana's relatives, no matter what the circumstances were. Others argue there is no evidence he ever assumed that support was guaranteed. That uncertainty is part of what makes the situation so interesting. The public does not fully know what conversations happened behind closed doors or how family members truly felt as events unfolded over the years. What is becoming clearer, though, is that the story might be more complex than many people originally believed. If Diana's sister is indeed stepping forward after so many years of silence, her perspective has the power to challenge assumptions that have been around for a very long time. And if those assumptions turn out to be wrong, Harry might be facing a reality he never expected. That even within Diana's own family, agreement was never as certain as it seemed. By the time Lady Sarah McCorquodale's reported perspective started getting attention, one issue had already become impossible to separate from the wider story. It was not a single interview, a family disagreement, or a royal appearance. It was the comparison that had followed Meghan Markle for years. Over and over again, public discussion kept coming back to the same question. Was Meghan experiencing a modern version of what Princess Diana once went through? The comparison appeared in newspaper columns, TV debates, documentaries, social media discussions, and countless conversations among royal watchers all over the world. Over time, it became one of the most powerful and controversial narratives surrounding Meghan's public life. The fascination was easy to understand. Both women entered one of the most watched families in the world. Both became the subject of huge media attention. Both faced intense public interest that often went way beyond ordinary celebrity coverage. To many supporters, those similarities seemed really obvious. They viewed Meghan's experiences through the lens of Diana's story and saw patterns they believed could not be ignored. Yet others viewed those comparisons very differently. As the years passed, critics started questioning more and more whether the similarities were being overstated. They argued that while certain experiences might have seemed similar on the surface, the circumstances, historical context, and personal situations remained fundamentally different. What some people saw as a meaningful parallel, others saw as an oversimplification of two very complex lives. The debate slowly moved beyond just facts and entered the realm of perception, where agreement became much harder to reach. This is where the reported involvement of Diana's sister becomes especially significant. Unlike commentators, journalists, or royal experts, Sarah has a unique position in the discussion. She knew Diana before the titles, before the palace walls, and before all the global attention that turned her into a symbol recognized everywhere. That personal history gives her perspective a different kind of weight. Whether people agree with her or not, her connection to Diana cannot be dismissed. For some observers, that might explain why the ongoing comparisons have reportedly caused discomfort within parts of Diana's family. The issue is not necessarily whether Meghan and Diana shared certain challenges. The more sensitive question is whether shared experiences automatically make it okay to put them in the same story. Similarity and equivalence are not always the same thing, yet public discussions often blur that distinction. That uncertainty has become the heart of the controversy. Supporters of the comparison argue that Diana's experiences offer helpful context for understanding Meghan's journey. Critics say that repeatedly framing Meghan through Diana's story risks reducing both women to oversimplified versions of themselves. Between those positions sits a growing area of disagreement that has not been resolved. The more attention the comparison gets, the more emotionally charged it becomes. Every new debate seems to make existing divisions deeper instead of settling them. And because Diana remains such a powerful figure in public memory, any discussion involving her legacy carries enormous emotional weight. What makes the situation even more interesting is that there might not be a universally accepted answer. The comparison continues because different people interpret the same events through completely different lenses. Yet, if Diana's sister has indeed become concerned enough to enter the conversation, it suggests the debate has reached a point where silence itself might no longer feel neutral, and that possibility is beginning to reshape the entire story. Before Princess Diana became one of the most recognized women on Earth, she was simply Diana within the Spencer family. Long before palace ceremonies, newspaper headlines, and global attention changed her life completely, she existed in a world known only to those closest to her. It was a world of family gatherings, private conversations, ordinary routines, and personal relationships untouched by the pressures that would later define her public image. Very few people witnessed that version of Diana more closely than her sister, Lady Sarah McCorquodale. That reality is what makes Sarah's perspective so important today. While millions formed opinions about Diana through photographs, interviews, and public appearances, Sarah knew her before any of that existed. She knew the young woman behind the headlines. She knew the family member rather than the global icon. That distinction matters because public memory often keeps only part of a person's story, while private memories can show a very different picture. Over the years, Diana became a symbol for many different causes, emotions, and stories. Admirers celebrated her kindness. Critics looked closely at her choices. Historians argued about her impact. Yet, as her public image grew bigger, some of the quieter details of her personality became harder to see. The more famous she became, the easier it was for people to focus on the myth instead of the real person. Those closest to her, however, carried memories that existed beyond public perception. Family members remembered moments that never appeared in documentaries or front page stories. They remembered personal qualities that cameras could not fully capture. Diana's warmth, sensitivity, humor, and emotional depth were experienced firsthand by those who shared her early life. These were not carefully managed public impressions. They were everyday experiences formed long before royal expectations came into the picture. This background might help explain why ongoing comparisons involving Diana can feel so personal for some members of her family. Public discussions often focus on broad themes and visible events. Family members, by contrast, often see those same conversations through the lens of personal memory. They are not just comparing public images. They are comparing those images to a real person they actually knew. For Sarah, that difference could carry a lot of weight. As debates surrounding Meghan Markle and Diana's legacy continue, Sarah's understanding of Diana is rooted in decades of shared history. Her perspective was not shaped by documentaries, commentary shows, or public stories created years after Diana's death. It was shaped by real lived experience. That does not automatically make her interpretation correct, but it does make it uniquely informed. The tension comes from the fact that memory itself is powerful. It influences how people understand present events and how they evaluate comparisons involving the past. What seems reasonable to outsiders might look completely different to someone who has personal knowledge that the public does not have. That gap between public perception and private memory often creates misunderstandings, especially when talking about figures as famous as Diana. As attention turns more towards Sarah's reported views, the conversation becomes about more than just Meghan Markle. It becomes about who gets to define Diana's story and whose perspective carries the most authority. While the public keeps debating similarities, differences, and legacy, Sarah's memories bring something that cannot easily be challenged or repeated: a first hand understanding of the woman behind the legend, and that reality might become more important as the larger story continues to unfold. As attention surrounding Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and Princess Diana's legacy kept growing, the conversation slowly became bigger than any single person. What first looked like a debate about public comparisons and family perspectives started turning into something more complicated. Underneath the headlines, a quieter question was coming up. How were Diana's relatives themselves interpreting the events happening around them? The answer was much less simple than many people assumed. For years, public discussion often treated Diana's family as one united voice. Because they all shared the same connection to her, many naturally thought they viewed modern controversies through a similar lens. But families rarely agree on everything, especially when emotions, history, and personal memories are involved. Time might bring relatives together through shared experiences, but it can also create very different interpretations of those experiences. That reality seems more and more relevant as scrutiny around Harry and Meghan continues. At the center of the situation is a tough balance between public loyalty and private belief. Supporting a family member does not always mean agreeing with every choice they make. Likewise, expressing concern does not automatically mean rejection or hostility. Those distinctions often get lost in public debates where people usually expect individuals to pick clear sides. Inside families, though, emotions are usually more complicated than simple loyalty or opposition. For Diana's relatives, that complexity might be especially hard to handle. On one side stands Harry, a son who lost his mother under very difficult circumstances and has spoken openly about how that loss affected his life. On the other side stands the memory of Diana herself, a figure whose legacy carries deep emotional meaning for those who knew her personally. When conversations start mixing those two realities together, hard questions come up naturally. The situation becomes even more sensitive because ongoing royal disputes have shown little sign of going away. Years after Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties, disagreements keep making headlines in many countries. Each new interview, documentary, public appearance, or reported disagreement seems to bring back old tensions. What might have seemed temporary at first now feels like a long-running conflict with no clear end in sight. That persistence appears to be creating growing unease among some observers. The concern is not necessarily tied to one event or one statement. Instead, it centers on the bigger story taking shape around Diana's legacy. As comparisons continue and different interpretations get attention, some family members might worry that Diana's story is slowly being pulled into modern disputes in a way she can no longer influence herself. Of course, others might argue the opposite. They might believe Diana's experiences are still relevant and that talking about them helps provide important context for understanding current events. That perspective remains part of the debate and helps explain why opinions differ so much. The challenge is that both sides often claim to be protecting the same legacy while reaching completely different conclusions about what that protection should look like. As reported perspectives from figures like Lady Sarah McCorquodale get more attention, the stakes keep rising. What once seemed like a disagreement involving just Harry, Meghan, and the royal family now seems connected to a broader network of relatives, memories, and competing responsibilities. The deeper the conversation goes, the clearer it becomes that this is no longer just about public perception. It is becoming a debate about who has the authority to define Diana's story. For years, Lady Sarah McCorquodale managed to stay outside the growing storms that surrounded Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and Princess Diana's legacy. While headlines got more intense, documentaries came out, and public debates spread across TV screens and social media, Sarah stayed mostly absent from the conversation. Her silence was consistent, deliberate, and really rare in a story that seemed to attract comments from almost everyone connected to it. Yet the question getting attention now is not why she stayed quiet for so long. It is what might have finally convinced her that silence was no longer enough. The answer seems to lie in a series of developments that slowly changed an ongoing discussion into something much harder to ignore. None of these developments happened overnight. Instead, they built up over time, adding layer after layer of controversy until the whole conversation started to feel different. What began as debates about Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties eventually grew into bigger questions involving Diana's memory, her legacy, and how her story kept being brought up in modern public disputes. One theme stood out above the rest. Comparisons between Meghan and Diana never went away. In fact, they seemed to get more frequent as public interest grew. Every new controversy, every interview, and every major development appeared to bring back the discussion. Supporters pointed to similarities in media treatment and public scrutiny. Critics argued that the comparisons made two very different lives seem too simple. As those opposing views clashed over and over, the debate became more emotional. For someone like Sarah, that situation might have carried a unique meaning. Unlike commentators watching from a distance, she had personal memories of Diana that went back to before the public story even started. The version of Diana she knew was not a symbol or a headline. It was a sister. So, ongoing public talks about Diana's life might have felt very different to her than they did to outsiders. At the same time, tensions around Harry's relationship with both the royal family and public opinion showed little sign of easing. Years after major disagreements first appeared, new controversies kept getting attention. Instead of fading with time, existing divisions often seemed to get deeper. Every new development brought renewed debate about loyalty, responsibility, and the long-term effects of choices made by all sides. This combination of factors might have created what some observers see as a turning point. Not one big dramatic event, but a collection of events. Not a sudden shock, but a slow realization that the conversation was heading in a direction that could no longer be ignored. The significance lies not just in what was being discussed, but in how often Diana's name kept showing up at the center of those discussions. Of course, interpretations differ. Some think Sarah's reported involvement shows concern about how Diana's legacy is being used. Others argue she might just want to offer perspective in a debate that has become really divided. Without knowing what really happened in private, certainty is impossible. What is clear, though, is that something changed. A person known for decades of staying quiet now seems connected to a conversation she once avoided. That shift alone suggests the story has entered a new phase. If silence was once seen as the safest path, recent developments might have convinced Sarah that staying quiet had its own risks, and that realization could turn out to be much more significant than anyone first expected. In the quiet spaces away from cameras, the conversation surrounding Harry, Meghan Markle, and Princess Diana's legacy started shifting into something much more private and complex. While the public kept focusing on visible statements, interviews, and royal commentary, there were reportedly quieter discussions happening within family circles that never reached public view. These conversations were not described as confrontational, but as careful attempts to understand how ongoing tensions might affect relationships, reputations, and the long-term stability of the family story. According to reports, members of Diana's wider family circle, including Lady Sarah McCorquodale, were becoming more aware that silence in public did not mean silence in private. As debates about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry kept spreading globally, the pressure to respond internally seemed to grow, even among those who had stayed away from involvement before. Inside these private discussions, concern was reportedly less about public opinion itself and more about how those opinions were shaping the long-term perception of Princess Diana's legacy. Some family members were said to worry that repeated comparisons between Diana and Meghan Markle were starting to blur differences that had always been clear within the family. Others, however, believed that public talk had simply grown beyond anyone's ability to control, especially given how much global attention was focused on both women. What made the situation more delicate was the understanding that any comment from within Diana's family could quickly become part of a much bigger media story. Even those who preferred to stay quiet seemed to realize that their silence itself was being understood in different ways by outsiders. More and more, the issue was not just about Meghan Markle or Prince Harry, but about how Diana's memory was being used as a reference point in ongoing disagreements. As the discussions continued behind closed doors, the feeling grew that the family was dealing with not just public scrutiny, but also internal disagreement over how to respond. This emerging divide did not show itself as open conflict, but rather as small differences in interpretation, tone, and responsibility. Yet even small differences carried weight because they touched directly on Diana's legacy and how it should be understood today. For some observers, this growing tension suggested that the story around Diana's family was no longer unified, but quietly split across different viewpoints. The more these private conversations stayed out of public view, the more speculation grew about what each family member truly believed. At the center of it all remained a shared concern over Diana's memory and how it kept shaping every new development. As these internal dynamics changed, the bigger story started to feel less like a public debate and more like an ongoing private struggle with public consequences. What came out from behind closed doors was not clarity, but a deeper awareness that the situation was still unfolding in ways no one could predict. In a moment that neither supporters nor critics expected, Lady Sarah McCorquodale's reported perspective started circulating and quietly changed the tone of the discussion around Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and Princess Diana's lasting legacy. Rather than a public attack or dramatic confrontation, it was described as a thoughtful reflection that got attention mostly because of who said it. For years, Diana had been talked about through media stories and public memory. But Sarah's voice carried a different kind of weight, grounded in real life experience instead of just interpretation. As conversation around Meghan Markle evolved, it moved away from surface level comparisons toward deeper questions about legacy, identity, and responsibility within the royal story. What stood out was not harsh criticism, but the lack of absolutes, suggesting concern rather than confrontation. Observers noticed that her remarks seemed to recognize Harry's personal journey, while also quietly questioning how Diana's memory was being used in the ongoing public debate. A subtle thread of concern for Harry ran through interpretations of her position, with some seeing it less as division and more as a warning against emotional escalation. At the center of it all remained Diana's memory, acting as both emotional anchor and point of tension whenever past and present royal experiences were compared. Unlike typical media commentary, Sarah's reported perspective was seen as rooted in personal history, giving it an emotional depth that outside analysis could not easily copy or dismiss. This difference led to divided interpretations. Some believed her involvement could change how future discussions about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are framed, while others warned that too much meaning might be read into an incomplete or selectively understood account of private sentiment. Even so, the impact was clear. A new emotional layer had entered an already sensitive story, bringing back interest in how family voices affect public understanding of private history. Attention turned more and more toward what this could mean for Harry given his long connection to Diana's family and legacy. As speculation kept building around how far these views might reach within the bigger story, the unexpected message changed everything and raised questions no one saw coming. As this story reaches its most delicate stage, attention shifts to what Lady Sarah McCorquodale's reported involvement could mean. The situation is no longer seen as just isolated reactions, but as part of a larger question about Princess Diana's legacy and the fragile relationships in her family. What began as public debate has become something tied to memory, identity, and emotional history. For years, stories around Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and the royal family have shifted between conflict and attempts at understanding. Each new development adds layers to an already complicated story. Diana's memory stays central, shaping how everything is seen. Her family's perspective, therefore, carries extra weight, grounded in real life experience rather than public guessing. As discussion grows around Sarah's reported view, questions come up about future relationships. There is no clear answer, only recognition that emotions are still deeply involved. Some believe her intervention could open up understanding. Others think it might make tensions worse. Both interpretations exist and neither can be proven. What makes things even more complicated is the continued focus on Diana. Her legacy shapes how every development involving Harry and Meghan is understood. To some, she represents kindness and strength. To others, she shows lessons about fame and media pressure. This makes sure that every mention of her name carries emotional weight. Public reaction to Sarah's perspective makes the dynamic even stronger. Instead of settling the debate, it adds more layers of interpretation. Supporters and critics see it differently, while others feel a responsibility to protect Diana's memory. One set of remarks becomes many different stories depending on how you look at it. The question of reconciliation remains uncertain. There is no proof that things will get better or that they cannot. What exists is a space of unanswered questions, shifting emotions, and unresolved history. Even small signals might mean something important, whether they were meant to or not. The situation stands at a crossroads where legacy and relationships meet in unpredictable ways. Sarah's involvement does not close the conversation, but extends it, pushing the story into a phase where the past keeps shaping the present and the future stays open and uncertain. Amid this uncertainty, attention keeps shifting toward what might happen next behind closed doors. Observers note that even small developments could affect how the story is understood in the coming days, especially since discussions about Diana's legacy, family relationships, and public perception stay so closely connected. The weeks ahead might show whether these tensions ease, change, or get worse. But for now, the situation remains open with every voice, memory, and interpretation adding to a story still taking shape beyond public view. So, what do you think? Does Diana's sister speaking out change everything we thought about Meghan and Harry, or is it just another twist in the royal story? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.